So I'm going to read this introduction because I want to do it justice today. So we're thrilled that today we welcome a seasoned professional in the gambling industry. Probably won't want to be called that. He currently serves as the head of compliance and MLRO. He plays a pivotal role in ensuring regulatory adherence and promoting responsible gambling practices. His commitment to ethical standards is further exemplified by his participation in forums and consistently sharing best practice with his peers. He didn't pay me to say that, and he didn't have any involvement in the writing of this. I just wanted to do it justice. So welcome, Frazer. We're going to get straight into it because I was desperate to have you on as a guest from the moment we started the podcast. And this particular episode, we want to talk about your career growth and the trajectory that you've been on, the evolution that you've had in compliance. So, I want to get straight to it in terms of, from where you started. Did you ever think that you were going to go on to be a head of compliance in, such a short space of time?
It's funny you ask. I think about it quite often. When I got into the gambling industry, I took a job at a betting shop because I needed the work. And quite quickly found that I had this passion for compliance. I really loved the safer gambling environment and wanted to do more with it. If you'd asked me 8 years ago, do you think you're going to be head of compliance for a large online company? No, absolutely not. I got lost on the way to college.
So you started in safer gambling, right? That was one of your first roles in the gambling industry?
Yeah, certainly in the compliance part. I was a betting shop manager for a couple of years before that. And then moved into safer gambling for one of the large operators' retail environments.
Okay. So for me, I always say, and this is just my opinion, that I think working in safer gambling is one of the toughest roles in compliance and in our industry. What the safer gambling operatives have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Why didn't it scare you off? Why did you stick around?
I think part of that is coming from quite a diverse background. So I've worked retail jobs, night shift, hospitality. And I think you develop quite a thick skin working in those environments. So coming into safer gambling, yes, it's high stress. Yes, it's high pressure. The vicarious trauma in particular is really tough to handle, but it's not scary. Once you know what you're doing and how to do it well, it's really just about growing and innovating in that field. So
how different is your role now to when you first started in safer gambling?
Pretty huge. So even in terms of safer gambling, it's changed radically. My first safer gambling role was pre-pandemic. So you had access to credit card betting. There was quite a lot less remote customer interaction in particular. And what we're seeing now from a safer gambling perspective is much, much closer look at customer care and actually ensuring that operators do everything that's within their power to almost go out of their way to ensure customers don't come to harm. It's a complete 180 compared to back in 2018, 2019. It was more kind of are we covered? Now it's, can we cover them better?
Yeah. And that's a good point. I think, so for people listening, that because not all of our listeners are sorry, I got told by our editor that when I talk to Ray to make sure I don't go away from the microphone. So I'm conscious of this. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you based on what you just said there is, do you think that a lot of what we're seeing in terms of safer gambling practices and what you just said there in terms of it's very different to like 2018, 2019, how much of that is driven by regulation in comparison to how much is driven by companies just actually wanting to do the ethical?
Yeah, so before you answer that, because just to kind of put some context around that point, because, by the way, welcome, Frazer. Lovely to have you on. We're seeing so much messaging now, right, when it comes to advertisement and different types of education around safer gambling or responsible gambling, right? You see it everywhere, gamble responsibly, or an advert around kind of using the tools. Those messages is it generally coming from a place of actually what you're saying, needing to do more, or wanting to do more from a different perspective rather than are we covered, but covering and supporting customers, or is it coming, in your opinion, from the regulation?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't think I can answer it one specific way. But what I am seeing is a lot of push, particularly from industry bodies, to be seen to be doing more. And many of their operators within that industry body absolutely are and are genuinely pursuing that. But I think a lot of that is driven by fear of potentially excessive regulation or knee-jerk regulation based on people failing to do it in the first place. The innovation seems to be coming from a place of fear in many cases rather than a place of genuine good intent and goodwill.
Okay, interesting. And so talk us then, like, path to compliance. What is, because we're going to discuss your path to compliance, but what does it mean to you in terms of the path to compliance from an individual perspective or personal perspective, and also from in the kind of context of organizational environment? What does path to compliance mean?
So from an organizational perspective, it's about how compliance can be built into the special sauce, if you like. If you take some of the older, more monolithic companies, you're starting to see more and more compliance is stopping being something that's just duct taped onto the site and starting to be built in with their culture, built in with how they advertise now, particularly with the companies that are industry body linked. Whereas 5 years ago, you didn't see that. You seen compliance almost as an afterthought, something where, oh no, we've got a fine, we'd better step up and do something about that specific thing we were fined for. I think it's becoming a little bit more proactive, and that's really good to see. And that almost demonstrates a path to compliance from a regulator perspective over the last few years. From an operator, that could be, you've got some really good startups starting to come through and scaling up now, who started off with their COO was their compliance guy and that was all they had. And they've started to build that compliance function, 1 person, 2 people, now it's 20. And you're starting to see that coming through from the smaller players that are starting to challenge, is this real environment where compliance is built in culturally from the start. And I think that is one of the most positive paths to compliance that I can see from an operational perspective. Now, personally, my path to compliance, I think, is quite similar to many people's, particularly in the gambling industry, in that, like I said before, I got lost on the way to college. There's very, very few people that are in the gambling industry who, particularly in compliance, got there with full intent. I certainly didn't leave school thinking, hey, I'm going to be the head of compliance at a gambling operator one day.
We discussed this, sorry to cut you off, but I think we discussed it on nearly every episode now, me particularly, because something I'm actively wanting to change. And it's like you're saying, you went into college, lost your way, want a word. The concept was never actually want to be a compliance professional. But I want people actually to aspire from a younger age to actually consider the profession. So, sorry to cut you off there. Do you think I'll let you continue, but within that answer, do you think there's been a shift and change in that then?
I'd like to think so. I think what you're starting to see is there's some organisations out there that are starting to form apprenticeships for compliance in particular. Certainly, I know the Gambling Commission now is starting to bring apprentices through from a governmental body side of it. There's a couple of charities that I work quite closely with that are in fact rolling out an apprenticeship this year for compliance officers in the UK market, which I think is really, really exciting and really important for grassroots, for bringing up Gen Z and Gen Alpha as they come out of education.
That's the one, Gen Alpha. I was thinking this morning, what's the new generation? Gen Alpha, that's the one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so important. I think 10 years' time, 75% of the workforce is going to be Gen Z. 20 years' time, you're going to start bringing in 10, 15, 20% of Gen Alpha. If we don't get it right now at grassroots, what's going to happen in 20 years' time?
Yeah.
How do we get it right then?
We need to make sure we're nurturing them. And when I say nurturing them, I don't mean brainwashing, right? You bring these people in, you spot high potential, high talent people. And when they start to feed into that and they start to buy in with you, you tuck them under your wing and you mentor the hell out of them. And I think the big thing at the moment is all, oh, Gen Z's lazy. Gen Z isn't lazy, they just work different from us. And I think that's a really big opportunity for guys like us to learn from them while we're still young enough to change. Because if we get set in our ways, these guys are going to drive us, run us out of town in the next 15, 20 years. We're going to be, 50, not really chasing retirement. And all of a sudden, we just cannot keep up. We need to make sure that we adapt to help these guys thrive so that we can thrive.
I was listening to that thinking, I'm a lot older than I think you believe I am. I'm catching up on that.
And then going back on then your personal story and the path to compliance then. So kind of, I'll let you finish. Take us through that path then, finishing off that path.
Yeah, so as I was saying before, like I took a job in a betting shop basically because I needed to keep a roof over my head. Very quickly found that the safer gambling element of my role, that interacting with customers, really caring about whether or not someone's harmed, didn't feel like it was the norm, and I wanted to push that envelope and change that a little bit. I ended up moving from Glasgow down to Leeds to get a job in the compliance field within the industry, and very quickly found myself basically running a region of the country from a safer gambling perspective. Yeah. I think it's quite a huge step for me personally, to go from running a shop, running a cluster of shops, to looking after an entire region, Scotland and the North, and trying to ensure that almost 1,000 shops are all complying in the same way. Now, that almost forged me in fire. We were constantly, particularly post-pandemic, we were constantly in a backlog environment, working against time to make sure that the highest priority cases were always dealt with. Yeah. And somewhere around then, I moved into the online environment with a different company. They had a bit of regulatory involvement kind of the year previous, and the mission statement was basically fix SG compliance, rip everything up, innovate, and almost solve affordability. And it's one of the most proud achievements actually in my career so far, is being able to build into that as part of that team, create one of the first to market at registration UK affordability processes. And no one had done it previously. The Gambling Commission showed up. They loved it. And it's been difficult to top that feeling, but that really stoked that passion, that fire. And what I found is as I developed, as I grew within that role, I was becoming more and more passionate about SG, wanted to move into other areas, explored that a little bit further. And I've ended up in a much more operational role now, so strategic and operational, and looking after the whole big picture. And you know what? It's about chasing that passion. And I think as the stress levels in the safer gambling environment grew, I realised that I had these weaknesses or development areas in AML, fraud, reg compliance. Started doing research, learning more, completed an ICA qualification, and really grew into that. And now I find myself like 6 years on, head of compliance at an organisation, looking around for the grown-up and realising that grown-up is now me. And that's it was quite daunting when I took the role, but I'm starting to really find my feet, and just I'm not sure I fully answered your question.
No, you did. And I think it's, again, the answers are your answers, so there's no right or wrong answers here. It's just to get, again, your opinions, your perspective on things, and then ultimately it's your journey and your path to compliance. So I'm just trying to get an understanding of that. Sure. You mentioned two really key words there during your explanation, and that was trust and passion. So I was actually researching, and and actually when we talk about trust, it's something we will discuss in a future episode. But we look at trust, and we probably don't place enough emphasis on actually the positive impact of giving trust out to people or trusting people. And there was a study from the Psychological Association which reveals that if a employer feels, or if a company implements more trust into their employers, there's a 50% greater increase in collaboration and innovation. And you mentioned that you were trusted to rip up and create this new thing, this new tool, and you were actually able to implement and create something which was a market leader, and that was because of the trust that was put in you. So I think it's just kind of just putting that statement out around trust. And then the second one was, word was passion. You mentioned.
Can I just interrupt on the trust bit?
Yeah.
I think in that scenario, and we can talk, we work together. Yeah. So we work together. And I think in that scenario,
Work or worked?
we worked.
Okay.
We worked together. And specifically, we worked on projects that you're referring to. And I don't think it was a case of necessarily, it wasn't blind trust. You earned that trust. And I think that's really important message to get across is that, and we can come on to that in another question, is how did you earn that trust? But if you carry on with the passion part.
So the passion part was just to ask you if there are any pivotal moments, or could you share some pivotal moments where your career or your path went from just a job to a passion?
Yeah, I think there's a few key moments. So we already talked about that shift from betting shop manager to looking after safer gambling compliance for the whole environment, and just having that focus let me kindle that fire that was already there and just turn it into a real passion. And as it grew, I grew out of that role, moved on to another one. Again, as the passion grew, it just kept on going, innovating, doing good stuff within the compliance sphere, specifically SG, and just chasing that passion rather than chasing paper, chasing accolades, chasing qualifications, really following that passion and just seeing where it led me. And I think a lot of people, when they look at compliance, they see almost a very linear, almost paralegal path. I've not really found that at all. I've found that I've zigged, I've zagged, I worked in the third sector for a little bit. And although there's been up until recently, quite a strong focus on SG, I've always been able to dip my toes into the other disciplines, which is how I've managed to build the experience to get to here. And it's purely been by chasing passion. It's always been, I like that. I'm going to dig into it. I'm going to work on that more.
Yeah.
How can I make that my job?
Yeah, and I'll let you ask the question. But again, that word experience, I think, again, that's another thing that people need to place more focus on. Like I said, not chasing a paper, not chasing the titles, but chasing experience. If you get the experience, those things will follow you. And I think you're testament to that. So, yeah.
I think experience is a weird one for me, though. I kind of agree with you.
Yeah.
But the reason I say kind of is because there are so many jobs that get advertised for people that want to enter the industry, that have a passion, that have maybe done some research, but they're not given the opportunity because the recruiter, the company, wants somebody with 2 years, 6 months experience. So maybe a question back to you. I know we've got a guest here, but would you put experience over any of the other key characteristics when you're I'm trying to do what he said, when you're looking for someone?
Yeah, so for me, experience trumps skill. So if I see somebody with a qualification now as a recruiter, I'll give that a thought, but ultimately I'll look at experience and I'll also look at character, right? If you're interviewing somebody and having a conversation, can I determine this is the right character fit for the role or the organization? But ultimately experience, I want to see the experience that person has. And it doesn't have to be direct experience in the compliance role or the role that they're being advertised for, but have they got enough real world experience that can transfer into this role? So that's why I place a lot of value on experience, and it's worked quite well.
I don't necessarily. I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you, but for me, I like to be the person in some situations that takes the risk on giving that person experience. And that's going to bring me back to my.
But again, that's you're talking about specifically the experience in that role. I'm saying it doesn't have to be experience for what the role is, but if they got experience in life where they can transfer those experiences into this new experience or the experience that you're going to offer as an opportunity, that's what I'm talking about, not specifically like the experience within that role.
Let me be devil's advocate here a little bit. I think the experience question is very much a case of culture as much as anything else. But I think there's certain disciplines particularly within compliance, where experience absolutely does trump personality. Now, that's not to say that you can't have a really charismatic regulatory compliance officer, because you absolutely can. But I would rather see a regulatory compliance officer with 2, 3, 4 years experience, at least in the field, not necessarily, like you say, not necessarily within the gambling industry, because you've got to have the frameworks, the structure, the organizational knowledge in your head of how to work it. or you've got to have a really strong leadership team that are going to train you and coach you on that, which is where it comes into the culture piece. Do you have that almost trickle down culture of everybody that comes in is high potential, high talent, we're going to teach them, train them, develop them, almost as like a built-in redundancy succession planning. Everybody gets to a point where they can do their boss's job. Or you have a position where actually managers already worked off their feet, doesn't have time to do that level of mentorship. You need somebody that's got that 3 to 5 years of experience.
So I'm going to put it into a question then, and I'm going to use your situation, because when we worked together, you didn't necessarily have the experience of building a whole safer gambling process. And like you said, it was quite innovative at the time, industry leading. You didn't have a manager, a colleague that had the experience either. And I'll speak openly about that. I didn't have the knowledge that it took at the time. So you didn't have a mentor to guide you. You literally were just let loose. So in that case, I wouldn't say you had the experience, and I wouldn't say you had the mentorship. So why did that work out so well for you?
It's a really good question. I'd love not to say that a lot of it was luck, but unfortunately, I'd love not to say that a lot of it was luck, but I think a lot of it was luck in that Tom got brought in at the same time. Because you guys know, like, me and Tom just gelled, worked really well together, formed that kind of lasting bond. And what I lacked in experience, Tom brought in spades. And what Tom didn't have in terms of data and analytics, I brought that. And we just worked together as a unit. We didn't have a manager, but we managed each other.
Oh,
and,
didn't have a manager.
But again, so I don't think it wasn't a chance. Like you've mentioned, and I've worked with you as well in the past. And one thing I can absolutely pay testament to is that you are very analytical, and that is the problem solving element. So I think the reason why you're such a success, because you were focused on problem solving. Going back again into other episodes, I think in order to be a good compliance professional, one of the key characteristics of that is being a good problem solver. So I think that experience of problem solving was what stood you in good stead. I don't think it was a chance. I don't think it was by chance or by luck.
Sorry, when I said by luck, I literally meant luck in terms of.
I mean, the environment.
Maybe it was tactical because Alex did hire both of us at the same time, but that combination of the two skill sets was just a really big stroke of luck in terms of how successful it's allowed myself and Tom to be.
Yeah.
I think it would be remiss not to talk about safer gambling as a specific discipline where having a bit of humor, having a bit of charisma actually does help, because ultimately you're looking at this remote customer interaction process, and if you can't get on the phone to a customer, get a customer talking and sharing their thoughts, feelings, sometimes very serious personal information, you're going to really struggle, and you're going to struggle to coach a team to be able to do it as well.
Yeah, Alex has managed to get through his career without charisma, but other than that, it's been
Why?
But I think it goes back again to that conundrum where we discussed nature versus nurture. I think you had the nature of a problem solver, and the environment, the nurture. So you had the skills or the nature of somebody who can problem solve well through the analytical mind, and the nurture, the environment that's provided to you, allowed you to bring out that skill set to the best of your ability. So I think it was both. I think your actual personality was good and fit, but the environment was one that allowed you to excel. So I think when we talk about compliance then, and I know Alex wanted to talk about trust, and you can answer this at the same point. How has compliance evolved then for you during your pathway or during your journey in compliance?
Sorry, can you?
How has compliance evolved? The evolution of compliance. How has it evolved for you throughout your journey in compliance or to compliance?
So I think it's been quite interesting, particularly from taking the UK regulator as an example. It's moved from what was once very ambiguous. I talked earlier on about they basically set as the problem of solve affordability, whereas now it's evolved into a much more prescriptive environment, and some operators hate it, some compliance professionals hate it. I think it's actually quite beneficial to have much more strict guideline, yes, there's some scope in there to solve for your own risk appetite, for your own risk profile, but ultimately having that perspective from the Gambling Commission to be able to solve within that framework is much, I'm not going to say easier. It's much more clear to me than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago when it was all extremely ambiguous and
Subjective.
you were subjective. Yeah, you were seeing fines, big fines, left, right, and centre for similar stuff, but it was coming out too late for anyone to really learn from it. Now they're starting to be much more sharp with it and starting to produce learnings that we can actually move forward with and more prescriptively.
Yeah.
So you've been working in compliance roles now for many years, from safer gambling to now head of compliance. What, from the outside before you join compliance, what's the biggest myth that you've now come to realise actually it's just not true about working in compliance?
Compliance is a cost centre. I think compliance is the most misunderstood profit driver in any company, whether that's the gambling industry, banking, stocks, exchanges, wider things. Compliance isn't a cost center. Ultimately, it's a profit driver if you can use compliance to unlock sustainable futures for your company, whether that be avoiding fines, reducing liability through fraud, or even just understanding which customers you can nurture to make more value from without causing harm, without causing legal issues through proceeds of crime. If you're able to do that and do it well, you're going to put points and points and points on the bottom line of any company that you're going to work with. And I think that for me is the biggest myth, is just that compliance is this cost center. And you see it time and time again. There's layoffs, it's the compliance team that goes, and all of a sudden 5 years later that company catches a $250,000 fine. You see it time and time again. We're seeing it just now with likes of Chase, JP Morgan. And I'm not saying they're going to get a fine, but you're seeing these layoffs happening. You're seeing them happening in legal departments, things like that. And you have to sit back and wonder, like, when you're looking at compliance as a cost center, at what point do you realize that actually you're cutting your own knees off in 5 years' time?
Yeah. And I think just to back that opinion up, there's a PwC study in 2023 that actually revealed that companies and firms that invest heavily in their compliance programs in terms of compliance training and compliance software tools or technology experience a return of that investment of up to 200% in comparison to those who don't. So it goes to say that actually compliance and proactive compliance and investment in compliance actually is a good driver for actually improving your bottom line. So I think, like you're saying, I agree, definitely. It's one thing that Alex always says. He said, some people say that compliance is expensive, but there's definitely one thing more expensive than compliance, and that's non-compliance. So I definitely agree with that opinion.
I was just making notes of when you were talking there, and one of the things that you mentioned is that about people doing it well in terms of, you know, embedding compliance, and how that you've. I'll try and word this in the best possible way.
In a non-Raymond way.
Yeah, I'm beating around the bush. A Ray way, yeah. Is that I'm a massive fan of yours. I love the way you approach compliance and work in general. I've learned so much from you over the years, probably without you realising I steal so many of your ideas. So you've been really good at embedding compliance. You've been really good at getting buy-in from different departments in a company. For anybody listening that's in a compliance role or that's looking to go into a compliance role, if you could give them a bit of advice in terms of what you found successful when achieving buy-in, what would it be?
Figure out what value you can add to whoever you're looking for the support from. So for me, a big part of that was always almost bringing receipts. So I need you to put in this threshold so that we can then have a check and raise X amount of LTV per customer that goes beyond that threshold. Or, sorry. So looking at ways to almost make your buy-in pay. Now that could be as simple as moving the goalposts in terms of risk appetite, which is a really easy one to get buy-in for. It's a very hard one to dial back. But when you do need to dial it back, it's about bringing the receipts. It's about turning around to the business and saying, we are on track to have a bad time here. This is what I would predict to see in the next couple of years, whether it be an audit failing, changes in the law, things like that. Here's how we can make the changes now without it killing the bottom line in 3 years' time. And it's about being able to bring that evidence-based approach and really selling it, treat it as though you are in sales. I think we've all talked about this previously about compliance really being a sales role. Everything that you're doing is pitching and selling to somebody about how you can make their lives better, easier, safer. And when you're trying to get buy-in from the board, all they want to know is that their bottom line's protected. And if you're able to bring those receipts and convince them, your life just gets so much easier.
But what if it's not? What in the situations where you need to make a change because your interpretation of the law or regulations is that this is essential and has to be done this way, but you know the impact of that is this is going to take some money off of our bottom end. How do you then get buy-in in those scenarios? Because that does happen. There's not always a win-win situation. So what do you do in those situations?
Yeah, do you know what? Sometimes you do absolutely have to eat the pain, and it's not easy. It's never an easy conversation for you to sit down and say, "Hey boss's boss, hey board, we have this issue that's coming downstream." But ultimately, what you've got to do as a senior compliance official is to have that backbone, to have that spine, to just step up and say, "Actually, do you know what? This isn't going to work. I don't want to see you guys go to jail. I certainly don't want to get anything on my license. And I do not want everybody around us to lose their jobs. Yes, we could protect the bottom line for 6 months, but would you not prefer to see that revenue a little bit smaller, moving on 5, 10, 20 years to the future?" And again, it's not about the short-term wins. It's not about necessarily maintaining your bottom line there and then, but you can sell the long-term view. And sometimes that's not going to work, right? You can't win everything.
I was going to say that's such a tough conversation, and you've obviously got, the experience now, and you've got, call it what it is, the bravery to have those conversations. But what about somebody that's new into compliance that's say in a more junior role, they've just been given their first compliance officer position? That conversation is so tough to go to a board and say, "I know you're going to lose some money here, but you've got to do it." Is there any, I don't know, maybe there's no answer to this, but is there a tool, a tip that you can give them to say, this is what I would do in that scenario? Or is it just a case of,
I think he said it actually. I think he said, if you approach it as a sales pitch, right, and so as a business case, I think it's challenging. But I think if they approach it as a sales pitch, that might make it easier.
Yeah. So I'm looking for elaboration in terms of how does that sales pitch look? You go to the board in that scenario. What's the sales pitch there?
To a certain extent, it's market research, crowdsourcing. So I think part of what has allowed me to be quite successful is that I don't just sit in an ivory tower. I will collaborate within the organization. But what I find is really effective is building a network of people that are smarter than you, people that are working at bigger companies than you, people who have seen it, done it, felt the pain. And what you can do there is you can crowdsource what worked for you. How does this look for your company moving forward? And when you go to the board, then you can say, "Do you know what? 3 out of the 5 of the big 5 are already doing this. Companies in similar tiers to us are doing this. We're already seeing it happening in the banking industry. How long do you expect it to sit before the regulator moves it into the gambling industry?" And what I think is really effective about that is the more of us that collaborate together, the easier all of our lives get in terms of pitching this culture change as an industry.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, because we exchange messages on a regular basis, and you're never shy of sharing best practice or sharing information. And I think that's one of the things I found invaluable with you and others that we're in groups with, is that learning from what you guys are doing well. Or what I really like about what you do is you will also share with me when you think you've done something wrong or there's been a mistake, so that it's avoided by other companies. And I agree with you that that's not done enough.
Yeah.
So how and we've had this discussion before. I think it was with a previous guest in terms of getting collaboration amongst competitors within the compliance space. Then, you know, if you could change something right now for the good of compliance in our industry, in the gambling industry, what would it be? What would you change?
One thing.
One thing. You can give me a list if you want. But yeah, if you think one thing that's almost like a silver bullet that I believe this would really help.
I think protectionism is a huge problem for me. Now, what I mean by that is, like I said, people that want to sit in their ivory tower, they want to gatekeep what they think is the secret sauce. Now, from my perspective, the one thing that everybody, particularly in the gambling industry, particularly in any financial vulnerability area, whether it be banking, crypto, trading, whatever it is, customer protection and preservation of life is the one thing that we can all agree on, that we should agree on, and treating that as almost a guiding light is if we can get that right and collaborate, because ultimately if everybody's doing that bang on, perfect, and we're allowing innovation across operators, that can only have a net benefit. You're not going to have the Gambling Commission having to feel like they need to fine people quite so regularly, I would hope. You're not going to be in a position where the media, the public, and a solid percentage of the third sector are almost paying for the blood of the industry that they purport to uphold. And I think if we can get that protection piece right, everything else flows from it, because the collaboration will come naturally. If we're already working together for the right reasons, we can start to work together to innovate in other reasons as well.
Yeah, good. And it's so on that then.
That's a great answer, by the way.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I think we've had this conversation before where we were saying like the reason why criminals are so effective typically is because of the collaboration, is because of the utilization of network. And actually they don't have an issue with sharing best practice or USPs, whereas a lot of the sectors want to keep the USP, and actually they see too often doing good as a USP, which actually it should be shared. That should be something that's shared. So then based on that, is there like any key milestones that compliance professionals or organizations should achieve in order to know they're on the right path to compliance, whether it's in their personal development journey or in, as an organization, the path to actually being a compliant, from what we're discussing, organizational firm?
It's a really good question.
Your questions are so long.
I know.
So long.
I think a big thing for me has always been making sure that you're aligned with whatever your North Star is. For me, it's always been preservation of life over everything else. As I've kind of grown and developed in the roles that I'm in now, you start to find ways to make that commercially effective. And what I mean by that is ensuring that you are causing the minimum of harm to the minimum number of people, whilst making the rest of the business commercially effective. And I think that's a really huge thing. In terms of made it, if you can say objectively that your processes, policies, and everything in place is ensuring the preservation of life, but remains profitable, you're in a pretty good place, particularly from a gambling compliance perspective.
I think that's really good. And I might take that one, because I think the minimum amount of harm to the minimum amount of people is a really good starting point as a milestone. I think that's really, really, really good.
Should be a no-brainer though.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
not to downplay it, but you think like it should be.
It's so easy on paper.
Yeah.
But
you've
how
always
do you
been
do
that
it?
way. I think that from the moment I met you, one of the things that I really liked, I think even when we had our first discussions, was that your morals guided you on all of your decisions, and you were never, and to this day, I've never seen you swayed from what you believe your moral obligations are. And I think that's something that I've always admired, is that it's probably your greatest strength, is that you're led by your morals and you don't get swayed. So, and I'm going to make a question out of this somehow. With people that have the morals that you have, like, and you know, that's for the most part, we try to work with people with good ethics and good morals. Sometimes it's really difficult in a compliance role, and you'll know this now, to kind of goes back to what we've been discussing, but you'll have situations where people in your company are going to say, look, we're not doing that. I know we need to protect these customers from doing this. However, we've done our risk assessment and we're happy taking this risk. We realize there might be a bit of harm caused. You know, I'm going to put a disclaimer here. I don't think there's many operators that are doing that. But let's just say, for argument's sake, somebody is in a position in their company where the commercial side of the business is saying to them, we're happy with this risk. Go and do it anyway. How do they handle that situation?
Could you get me fired here?
No, but I think, listen, this is, I think, being conscious of what's said here. I think we're all in a position where, you know, we're trying to be open and transparent without putting our opinions out there to put anybody in harm's way. But I suppose, let me word it a different way then. If you were talking to a young Frazer, just starting out in compliance, and his boss has just come to him and said, look, I know you want to do this. It's the right thing to do, but you're not going to do that. How should somebody in that situation handle it in the most diplomatic way? How would a young Frazer handle that?
That's fair. I think it's a really good question, particularly from my perspective. A young Frazer would have been
probably very different to now.
much less measured in his response. I have seen myself at a previous operator getting genuinely angry and almost building that perception of having a hot head. And I think something that I would say to a younger Frazer was just stay cool. Keep the North Star in focus and keep pushing towards that, because ultimately the only way to drive positive cultural change in an organisation that quite rightly has the fiduciary responsibility to drive as much profit from every single customer as it can, to drive it in a direction where it can do that responsibly, ethically, and ultimately in a way that young Frazer is going to grow up to be able to stomach. And I think that for me is quite important, is just looking after your North Star, keeping your moral compass as North adjacent as you can make it, whilst accepting that there's going to be a level of risk appetite and risk acceptance that is going to go up in some companies and down in others.
That's an amazing answer.
And what about then those who are of a more capitalist nature? So the opposite to kind of somebody who is based on the kind of, what we said is just the people, right? How about those? How can we educate, or how can we speak into those people about actually having that compliance mind?
Sometimes it's about pester power. Like ultimately, it's like the old sell it bang ads, right? Like you've always got that guy just like showing up on your TV and no one's there to watch him, but he keeps on showing up. And sometimes for organisations that aren't particularly compliance focused, that's what you need to be. You need to be the sell it bang guy, just showing up, kicking down a door and being like, hey, we're still here. This is the right thing to do, even if you don't agree with us. And you need to be really careful about how to do it democratically, and be aware of your kind of internal company politics and things like that, so as you don't end up losing your job over it, because that's not going to solve anybody's problems. But just being aware that sometimes just being that voice will be enough to eventually get heard.
And what role do you feel that continuous learning has played? Because we're talking about your development, right? And like you said, it's broad. You've covered pretty much every kind of discipline within compliance, like from, you know, safer gambling, consumer duty, you know, general compliance, so data protection, and then also now more so, you know, the financial crime element of compliance. What is continuous, or how has continuous learning played a part in that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been really fortunate in my career, and I keep coming back to this luck thing, right? I've been really fortunate in that there's been an element of intent to it. I've sought out strong mentors, experts in their field, sitting opposite a couple of them just now, but like, but I've sought out strong mentors, and I've been really fortunate in that the roles that I've come into, quite often those people have been my direct line managers or my MLRO. In other instances, I've picked up mentors along the way who have been maybe adjacent to what I'm doing, and sometimes quite far removed. But what I've found from that is that I learn so much from people that have been there, done it, maybe done it from a different perspective to me. And for me, that's a big part of lifelong learning for me, is just finding people that you can say, do you know what? They do it really well. I want to be like them. But I think something that's more important than that is that piece of paying it forward, is that finding people who want to learn and teaching them. Because I can do 1,000,001 really, really good things in the industry, in the wider environment, whatever it might be. I can't personally change the world. What I can do is exercise a positive culture shift over a macro period. So you're talking 10, 20, 30 years. The legacy that I would love to leave is that overall changing culture from generation to generation.
I love that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because it's like certain things are just recurring in episode after episode. You know, we talk about passion, culture, compliance, and another one was legacy. And I think, Alex, you mentioned legacy as well in one of the previous episodes around your motivation or something that drives you to continuously want to develop and do more for the space. And it's just, I just think it's interesting that
it is interesting. And I want to go back on something you just mentioned a minute ago about mentors and the people that the managers that you had and seeking them out. And I think I've always tried to look at it in a slightly different way, is that when I go into a job or when I'm going into a new role, I don't normally care too much about the people above me, if that makes sense. I think in my career, I can probably pick a handful of things that I've learned from people above me. But the people that I've hired and I've worked with, like I've been surrounded by, I've learned so much more from. And actually, it's funny because I believe my mentors have actually been people that I've hired, as opposed to people that have hired me. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, yeah.
Like, I think I use you as an example. I use you as an example. Tom, who we mentioned quite a lot. But there's so much that I learned from yourselves that trumps anything I've learned from other senior managers. So I suppose what I'm getting at is, when you're looking to build your teams now, do you look at it that same way? Do you look at it as...
Before you answer that though.
Oh my God.
Sorry, because this is actually, it's almost like the opposite, right? So
Save it. Let him answer.
No, this is to you. This is to you.
Go on.
Why do you think that is, that you learn more from the people you hire than the people that have hired you?
Because the way I see it is that my managers typically have one lifetime's worth of experience. They have their own experience. But within the teams that I manage, the teams that I've overseen, I've got 5, 6, 7, 8 different people. So I've got 8 lifetimes worth of experience. So I'm almost 8xing that mentorship by having those people around me. So I think the most simple answer is purely mathematical, is that the more people I surround myself by who are much smarter than me, that I'm going to pick up so much more than by surrounding myself by one great person. Does that?
Yeah, makes sense. I just wanted to know if you thought the learning piece had anything to do with as well. Whereas I guess people that you hire have a higher potential or propensity to want to learn more rather than maybe... No,
I think like the managers that I've had, and I've had great managers in my career, and I've been really fortunate with that. Similar to you mentioned it before, I think I've been really lucky with that. And there were a couple of people I can, specifically point out in my career that have changed my career and my life trajectory 100%. But in terms of the people I've worked with, either I've hired or that I've just been part of a team with, I've definitely gained so much more from them, because my managers have their lifetime experience and they're almost limited by that. Obviously they can get experience from the people around them as well. But the team that we have, like I'll speak to Frazer on a weekly basis and say, what do you think about this? This new regulation's coming in. How have you interpreted it? Then I'll go and speak to another person and another person, another person. I've now got all these different views to take it from. Whereas if I just got that guidance from my manager, it's just one perspective. Yeah. So I think surrounding yourself by great people. And I think the question what was the question I asked now? You've done it again. My question was, now when you're working with people, in terms of the mentorship side of things, do you look for that same thing? Do you look to gain from them knowledge, or do you look to be their mentor?
It's a little bit of both. Now, I think it's varied from company to company. I think sometimes you need to be very mission focused, But more recently, the last couple of roles, I've looked at opportunities to really develop people. And I talked before about developing the next generation of compliance officers, and I think that's something that's really, really close to my heart. I've got a safer gambling manager just now who is Gen Z, but he's like the pre-pandemic side of Gen Z. Similarly, an AML team leader, they're pre-pandemic side of Gen Z. So they're absolutely learning obsessed. They want to develop, and they feel like almost their careers have been hampered by the fact that they've had a couple of years where there hasn't been a lot of opportunity to get out and about, learn things, crowdsource solutions. And this has been a really good opportunity for me now to step into that. Yes, I might be their mentor, but I'm learning a lot from them as well, because as they grow, they're coming to me with ideas, like you said. They're coming to me with ideas. What do you think of this? How do you feel about that? And sometimes, you know what, they'll bring me something and I'll be like, I don't love it. Here's how I would do it. Can we find somewhere in the middle? But sometimes they come to me with an idea and I'm just like, that is what's going to make you my boss in 10 years' time. And yeah, you're totally right. I think what I was talking about earlier about crowdsourcing solutions to pitch to the board, sometimes you've got that crowd inside your own team.
Talking of mentorship then, give us kind of your compliance starter pack for those aspiring compliance professionals, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, or fledgling companies, or even established companies that actually are genuinely trying to kind of change the trajectory of their compliance culture. Give us that kind of what it looks like, that starter pack.
Yeah. So I think looking at like people coming into the industry, do you need a lot of experience? Some people will gatekeep it. Some people say yes. Some people will say no. What I would say is there's an awful lot of people that get into the compliance industry within gambling from a pivot in another gambling sector. So getting into operational roles in gambling and then learning the ecosystem and then moving into compliance, I think is a much better grounding than, say, going to university, getting a law degree, and then assuming you know everything about gambling compliance. And I think that kind of comes into what you were talking about, Rhea, that parallel experience rather than direct role focused experience. So I think from an individual perspective, that's a really important part of it. From an operational perspective, I'm sometimes quite jealous of people that get in at the ground in a startup and start to build that compliance function. And I think I sometimes look at it and I'm like, I have absolutely no idea how these guys cope with it, being that one-man band doing absolutely everything. But I also think it'd be a hell of a ride to try it.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about starting your own sort of mentorship program?
It's something we've kicked about for years now, isn't it? And it's funny because I've thought about, do we start a mentorship program? How do we do it? How do we make it a much more wider, more influential thing for the industry? And it's something that I would absolutely love to do. It's something that, if anybody's out there listening, looking for a mentor, looking for mentees, maybe it's something we can do. Maybe it's something that us three can do, bringing in anybody else in the industry.
Yeah, so look, all full disclosure, I've been reached out to by a couple of organisations who work with schools, who have listened to the podcast, who actually reached out to us about providing, mentorship and kind of a pathway. And it's, again, something that's been a passion on my heart for over a decade now. I think I've spoken to you, Alex, about it many times. And I think it's something that's similarly shared by you. So I think the opportunity is there. Like you're saying, I think it's just about getting it right, that it's able to appeal to the demographic we're trying to encourage into the space. But I think it's definitely an opportunity there. So we can take this offline. And I think it's something hopefully in the future that, I think mentorship is really important. And especially like you're saying, helping people learn the ecosystem. I think that was something that you just said. And I was like, that's a really good, almost like just like buzz line or like statement piece for anybody who's a fledgling professional or a fledgling business or even established business. Get that ecosystem, an understanding of your ecosystem right, and you can become compliant in terms of what you're doing or in terms of your career progression. So,
am I allowed to name check an organisation at all?
Yeah, you can.
can.
And we can review it afterwards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool.
We can edit it out if it's not if it's not compliant.
We're going to keep this in now.
That's it. Yeah, that's game over. Career ended. I think one of the organisations that I do a lot of work with, Better Change, do some phenomenal outreach work to particularly like football fans and things like that. They work with a few different football teams to really outreach to fans about how to gamble positively. And it's not this thou shalt not gamble. It's very much like, oh, did you have a bet? Cool, no worries. Like, as long as it's affordable and you're happy, do it. And I think there's almost a missing piece of the puzzle there, which we're losing more and more of as third sector starts to become more insular, is that engagement with operators and punters to be working almost as three entities altogether. Because when you can bring that kind of collaboration, so you were talking about like outreach to schools and things like that, how do you normalize safe and sustainable gambling industry whilst everything is so heavily demonized? And I think there's a really key piece there is involving the third sector and just having that mentorship arrangement where you've got the checks and balances, you've got the operator who will be quite commercial.
Yeah.
Hopefully they're going to be compliant. Hopefully they're going to have an excellent culture. You've got the third sector where they're almost the checks and balances in that one. Let's keep it positive. Let's keep it away from the harm. Let's talk about best practice. And then you've got that third missing piece where it's the misinformed rest of the public, where all they really understand about the ecosystem is what they're told in the papers, what they're told by politicians, what they're told by third sector who rightly or wrongly believe that the industry should be abolished. And being able to bridge that gap in all three of those directions, I think would really build a really strong kind of mentorship program to bring people into the industry in a positive way.
Yeah.
I'd love to discuss this offline. I think the reason I asked the question about mentorship is because if you ever started a mentor program, sign me up. And I'm not just saying that because you're a guest, like genuinely, the time we worked together, I learned so much. So if you were doing a mentorship program, I'd be there. Unless, of course, I was, part of it as well. But I think there's something to discuss offline because I think there's opportunity there to better the industry, to better the knowledge and bridge those gaps that you just said.
I'm conscious of Alex wanting to finish up with his two questions, but we couldn't get you on the episode, on the podcast, Frazer, without talking about probably your favourite topic or subject, even more than compliance, and that's technology. When working with you were the most technologically savvy person I think I've ever worked with. That's
just because you used Excel. that was an advantage.
I'm going to give an opportunity to discuss like technology and compliance, because I saw a study which said that this is a 2024 study, that 80% of compliance professionals now feel that technology plays a massive or bigger role in their advancement of their careers in compliance. Talk to me about technology and compliance.
What he means is, I wanted an opportunity to get a statistic in there. So here's my question.
Talk to me about because again, you're compliance professional, but also you're someone who's really, really good with technology.
Yeah.
And obviously, technology is becoming more and more prevalent in just wider society, but also in compliance. So, talk to us about the role of technology in compliance for you.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've changed my opinion on over the years. I've sat in panels even a few years ago rallying against outsourcing parts of your compliance to automated organizations, things like that. And what I've seen now is that sector, particularly with the advent of AI, has really, really grown in a way that I don't think any of us could have conceived in 2019, even 2021, 2022. We couldn't have conceived it, and it's happened now. And we're all of a sudden, we're living in the future. The future is now. And we're not seeing a lot of adoption of it, which is crazy to me. But what I think the highest risk, as somebody that's worked in the industry for a while, has seen some service providers come and go, worked with some of the really good ones, worked with some of the really terrible ones. I think a real talent that needs to be developed within the compliance sector in particular is an awareness of vaporware and understanding when you're being sold a lemon. And I think it's so easy. Everything looks great in a slide deck. What does it look like in practice? And it's so difficult because of the dev time involved, because of the integration involved. It's so difficult to get an actual working test environment to prove concept. And I think that's something that service providers could do a lot better. And it's something that compliance officers, particularly where they're in a position of influencing budget, need to get better, because there's so much vaporware in the gambling compliance sector at the moment, and no one's really calling it out.
It's a great answer. It's a nice.
Yeah, I knew you wanted to. It was on his heart. I could tell it.
It was really good. So, as Ray mentioned, look, whenever we have guests on, we like to conclude, or I especially like to conclude with two what I think are important questions. So I'm going to dive straight into them. And the first one is, tell me about a recent failure, a recent problem that you've had that you learned a lesson from.
No, you're making it harder today. Usually he just says, tell me a time where there was something that didn't go to plan or didn't go so well in the last couple of weeks. You've made it a much more complex, difficult question today.
Yeah, because it's Frazer.
So,
okay, cool.
So go with Ray's version.
Simplify it.
Yeah, so something that I've brought in at my most recent organisation.
It can be personal as well. It doesn't have to be professional. It could be just anything.
That's fair. I'm going to keep the personal out of it. I think at my most recent organisation, bringing in almost a culture shift from compliance being afraid to speak up to an environment where, like I said, I'm just popping up in every conversation like, hey, compliance here. That's been an interesting one for me, because I think I actually had a conversation with one of the senior team, and he mentioned to me, hey, could we maybe be just a little bit quieter about that, because you're going to make the board scared. And that for me was a big reality check, because I try to be as radically transparent with senior leadership, the company, my staff, everybody as I can be. And it was a bit of a learn for me to just be like, hey, sometimes part of the sales pitch is absolutely knowing how to cushion a blow.
I love that. A valuable lesson for anyone listening. That's a good one. Thank you. And then the final question is, on the other side of it, tell me about a recent success. Tell me about something in your life, at work, that's gone well for you.
Goodness me.
Don't worry, every single guest has the same reaction to the questions.
Yeah. They clearly haven't been watching previous episodes.
Yeah, do you know what? Like, it's a tough one, because you always think, like, and that's not fair, I've watched them. It's a tough one, because you sit there and you listen to these guys knock them out of the park, and it sounds so easy at the time. But I think...
Should I tell you why I asked this question at the end? Is because people in compliance are so critical of themselves. We find it quite easy to pinpoint a challenge we've had, a problem, a failure that we've done. But the moment you ask somebody, tell me something good that you've done, and it happens all the time. Like, you might have put your kid to bed on time for the first time in 6 months. You know, you might have completed your first 5K run. You might have implemented a new process, but we forget about them. Yeah. But we remember the failures and the problems, and we forget about our successes. And that's the reason I ask it, is because you're doing a great job, and it's almost a reminder to yourself and to others listening that, you know, I've done something great. So hopefully that helps. There must be something, you know, recently, you can go as far back as you want, just something that you look on and you think, yeah, I'm proud of that. That was good.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I've had quite a lot of difficulty with imposter syndrome over the entirety of my compliance career, to be honest with you. It's been one big leap after another big leap after another big leap. And I've always battled this almost, am I good or am I neck deep in the Dunning-Kruger effect? And I think something that I'm really proud of is just always having that courage to take the step. And I think when we're talking about people that are relatively new or building their careers in the compliance industry, having that faith and backing yourself doesn't always work. I've had to take pay cuts, sidestep, move into different jobs on this pathway. But backing yourself and having that faith to just come back from hits is something that I'm really, really proud of in and of myself. And I think it's really helped me grow my career, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years.
That's an absolute mic drop moment. Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a way to end.
Yeah, absolutely mic drop moment. Wow. So thank you, Frazer. Yeah, we could go on here for hours and hours.
Let's end there, because that's the best answer that we've had. The fact that you're betting on yourself and advising others, back yourself.
Yeah.
I think we've had a discussion about this so recently. I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
Look, thank you again, Frazer, for joining us.
Why's your voice gone so loud? Whenever you conclude, you turn into Barry White and your voice goes deep. It's like you're trying to sexify the Compliance Chronicles.
I'm trying to make...
I mean, if Ree can't make compliance sexy, who can?
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
Before we do leave, actually, I had a message from somebody who watched the episode, and they reached out to me on social media, and they said, look, I work in sales or marketing, and I must say I've watched a few episodes now, really good content, and I'm actually starting to hate the compliance team a little bit less. So I thought that was quite funny, and I responded saying, look, a few more episodes and you might even like them. Yeah. So, but thank you again, Frazer. Again, to all you who have been listening, who've been viewing and sharing and commenting, we really do appreciate it. We're really grateful for it. And we just ask you to continue supporting, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing to help this podcast reach more and more people. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.
Cheers.